What's up, guys? It's Alec Torelli. Welcome back to an episode of the Hand of the Day, where today we're going to be taking a look at an epic hand between Greenwood and Sue, super deep in the main event. Check it out right here.
Hand of the Day.
If you guys are new to this channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, because at Conscious Poker, we're going to be releasing a lot of the most interesting hands from the World Series of Poker main event. All of them are going to be reviewed right here on Hand of the Day. If you have hands you want me to review, be sure to comment below as well. Turn on notifications so you don't miss a video. But without further ado, let's jump right into this hand. So Sue is the big stack here, has 100 big blinds, super deep in the main event, and gets folded around to him in the cutoff with 10-9 of clubs. Blinds 125, 250 with a big blind ante of 250, and he opts for a rather small min raise here. I think most of the time as the chip leader opening in late position, you're probably going to see something like 2.5x open, especially with a big blind ante and so much dead money in the pot. But I guess he feels like maybe he wants to be able to call a 3-bet if someone 3-bets light here from the blinds or the button. And so opening smaller gives him a better price on his 3-bet. It also gives him a better price on his raise. And just allows the stack to pot ratios to be even deeper, lowers variance, etc. So I'm fine with the min open as well, just trying to get behind why he's trying to do it. Those are some thoughts that come to mind. Folded over to Greenwood here in the big blind, who has the aces. Great spot, obviously. And while I think he's going to be pretty damn tight here, being the other biggest stack deep in the main event, out of position against the only person that could bust him, with aces, you got a 3-bet. The question is how much. And here's where I see a lot of players go wrong. They make a 3-bet here to like 1.6 million. And then what happens? The big stack's like, well, thank you. You just told me you have a strong hand. Now I'm going to call you in position and bust you. So here, if you look at some of the sims on Pile Solver, some of the GTO sims, they're advocating a big 3-bet size out of position, especially from the big blind. When you have so much incentive just to call, your range is going to be a little bit tighter for 3-betting. In this spot, it makes sense to 3-bet bigger. So I love Greenwood going 5x the original sizing here. So 500K to 2.5 million is 5x, and that's what he chooses. That makes a lot of sense to me. You want to cut down on your opponent's implied odds. You want to make the stack to pot ratios smaller so you could profitably get the money in post-flop in pretty much any situation. So I love this sizing from Greenwood here. It's hugely different, making it small versus making it big. Don't make that mistake. Great job from Greenwood, makes it 2.5 million. Over to Sue, who, while I think would fold out some hands that don't play well post-flop, a hand like Ace-Jack offsuit, or maybe like King-10 offsuit, those types of hands. 10-9 suited, even facing this big sizing, is a great hand to call with. You actually don't mind your opponent having a hand like aces, or you kind of knowing that they have a very strong hand based on the situation, because you can bust that hand. This hand plays very well, so calling with middle rundown suited connectors or pocket pairs like sevens, those are great hands to call with in this spot. Sue opts to call, and let's take a flop. With a pot of 5.4 million, the flop comes down Queen Jack 4 with a flush draw. And here Greenwood has a stack to pot ratio of about 3, and it's 2.5, 3. And this is a clear bet. You're going to want to bet this flop, build a pot, and plan on jamming or betting the turn and jamming the river. Now, one of the key things you want to ask yourself in spots like these is to remember how your bet size on the flop will change the scope of this hand. So if you bet really small on this flop, like 1.4 million, you're setting this up for a 3-street game. So you're going to bet small on the flop, bet medium on the turn, and jam a small amount relative to the pot on the river. Now, if you don't want to play a 3-street game and you want to play a 2-street game, you would bet like 3.5 million on the flop, setting it up for like a $12-13 million pot on the turn, and then you would have about 10 million left. You jam all in for a pot size bet or a little bit less on the turn. So it's important to see that the pot size sort of compounds as the hand goes on, and how you bet on the flop changes the way this hand will be played on the turn. So I'm okay going both. But I guess the drier the board, the more I would lean towards a 3-street game. The wetter the board, the more I'd want to get my money in and protect my equity and not allow scare cards to come to deny me the chance of doubling up. The more I'd want to bet bigger on the flop and then jam it all in on the turn. So if the board was like 10-9-6 with a flush draw, probably go for a little bit bigger size on the flop and then jam it all in on the turn. Queen Jack 4 is kind of in between. There's definitely some draws out there. There's a flush draw, there's a straight draw. But it could be a situation where you're way ahead, way behind. If your opponent has a hand like Jack 10, you don't really mind it being a 3-street game. So this is kind of like in between. It could really go either way. Greenwood opts to bet 1.8 million, which I'm totally fine with. It sounds like he's setting this up for a small bet on the flop, small bet on the turn, and a jam on the river. Over to Sue now, who has a very clear call here. You definitely don't want to raise in this spot and get jammed on and then have to fold out so much equity. So typically in spots like these, you want to look at your stack to pot ratio and you want to think about if you can afford to get all the money in on the flop profitably, then raising would make sense. So if Greenwood had 7 million left, you might just want to jam here and get him to fold a hand like Ace King, fold out some of his equity, and maybe fold out a Jack, and go about the hand that way. You can realize your equity and shove profitably. But when he has a stack that's bigger than that, you don't want to raise here because then if he jams, you have to fold. Stack to pot ratio in these sort of nuanced situations is something I talk a lot more about in the membership at Conscious Poker, which you can get access to for free at the link below. There's a free trial. So if you want more information on how to navigate these sorts of spots, check that out as well. Over to Sue, who makes a great call here on the flop. Not too much to say about it. It's very standard. He could also rep some diamonds on the turn if those sorts of things come. So I think his call actually symbolizes more than what meets the eye. Maybe if a diamond comes, he can then bluff that card. So calling gives him some options later in the hand. He calls, and let's take a turn. The turn comes down to Jack of Spades. With a pot of 9 million, Greenwood has a tough decision with 11.3 million left. Pretty much a stack to pot ratio of 1. He basically has a pot size bet left, a little bit more. So the question is, what is the best play? Well, one thing you want to think about here is your hand too strong to fold? And I think in this spot, the answer is yes. If Greenwood checks and his opponent bets all in or bets 5 million, Greenwood can't fold, right? He beats flush draws. He beats some queens even that decide to bet, which is a little bit less likely. He beats some straight draws like King 10, 10, 9, some Ace 10 types of hands. And so he just can't fold. So he's going to go broke here pretty much no matter what, right? Whether he goes all in if his opponent has a jack and calls, or he checks, his opponent goes all in and he calls. He's going to go broke the times his opponent has him beat. The question is, how do we optimize the situations in which we have the best hand? And I think the answer here is by betting. I think betting is better because you get value from hands that would otherwise check if you checked, namely a queen, which makes up a large part of your opponent's range. Sure, you block some ace queens, but you beat king queen and queen 10, which do make up a large part of the value range that your opponent has. Your opponent could also have a jack, but ace jack, your aces actually block those ace jack suiteds, right? Because we have the ace of hearts and the ace of clubs, and the jack of diamonds and the jack of spades is on the board. So ace jack suited is impossible, right? So your opponent can't have ace jack suited. Ace jack offsuit, he would probably fold pre-flop. So the only jacks he can really have are king jack suited, jack 10 suited, and queen jack suited. There's just not that many combos of jacks. So you don't really have to worry too much about the times that you're beat. I think the best way to play this hand is to optimize the times you have the best hand and put max pressure on a queen. You also want to bet here because you don't want your opponent to take a free card with a hand like 10-9, decide not to bluff with it, and then bust you on the river, realize his equity for free. Or what if he has a random flush draw, like 9-8 of diamonds, and he just takes his free card and he has a bunch of outs against you and you don't charge him for that equity. So I think the best way to play this hand is to bet. Now the question is, how much? Well, what's the best size to bet to get value from a queen and to charge those draws? Well, if you jam, those hands, sure, a queen is in a tough spot if you jam, but those draws are definitely going to fold. And I think a queen might have an easier fold as well. Whereas if you bet like 4 million here, 3.5 million, your queen is always going to call, and those draws are always going to call. And then you could kind of evaluate the river, whether you want to check call and pick off bluffs, depending on your read on the turn or what you think your opponent has, or if you want to jam the river and try and get value from a queen. So you give yourself some options on the river. You do make the hand a little bit harder to play because maybe you get outplayed on some rivers. But I think long term, the most EV play, like the play that will win you the highest amount of chips, is to bet small here. And I actually think that's a really, really good play. It also allows you to bluff too. It just makes you a little bit more difficult to play against. It makes the hand more dynamic. It gives you more options, which allows you to make some better decisions. Greenwood bets 3.5 million. He seems to agree. Now it's over to Sue here. And I think this is a really unique spot for Sue. He can call here if he thinks his opponent's going to shut down and then he can bluff jam the river. But that line is kind of risky. I've seen some people do that, like double floating, hoping that their opponent checks and then hoping that they can bluff the river and their opponent doesn't have a showdown hand to call with. But that line seems pretty risky. If I'm going to risk all my chips on the turn here, I'd much rather do it as a jam and take the aggression. Maybe my opponent will fold a hand like that he's value betting, like king queen or ace queen. Maybe he'll fold aces or kings. Maybe he's definitely going to fold out some equity if he has a hand like, you know, the nut flush draw. He might fold that hand, right? Whereas if I call, he might jam that hand on the river and then I'm stuck with 10 high. I'm going to have to fold anyway. So I think jamming is a good play here. I also think that Sue can rep a jack easier than Greenwood could rep a jack. I think some of Greenwood's jacks will check the flop. Like if Greenwood 3-bet pre-flop with ace jack and then flop the jack, he might just check the flop and like try and play pot control. So I think Sue is more likely to have a jack than Greenwood, and by raising here, he's repping a jack. He's basically saying, look, like I have trip jacks, and there's definitely some trip jacks in his range. When you weigh that against the bluffs he has to pick some bluffs to balance out the times he's jamming the turn with a jack. If Sue is only jamming the turn here with a jack, then Greenwood could just fold aces and basically play perfectly on the turn. So Sue has to have a balanced range on the turn. He has to jam with some jacks, maybe like king jack suited, jack 10 suited, and then some bluffs. And it's like, what are the best bluffs to pick? Well, 10-9 is a pretty good bluff. You have, you know, the bottom of your range, you have no showdown value, and you block some jack 10s. I guess that helps. You block some jack 9s, and you can't run the pot otherwise. So I think this hand is a good hand to pick as a bluff. Maybe king 10 is another good contender, but I kind of like 10-9 more because you don't block any of the ace kings, kings, or king queens that your opponent could have. So there's more likely to have those hands. They're more likely to fold those hands on the turn when you do jam. So I think 10-9 is really the perfect bluff. Maybe a hand like, you know, 9-8 of diamonds is good too, but I almost like not having diamonds because it's more likely your opponent has diamonds and then he's going to fold, so your bluff's going to work more. So 10-9 is really the perfect bluff to me. I actually really love this hand to choose from, and that's what Sue does. He decides to go for it, and power to him. It's easy to sit here afterwards and analyze in my hotel room what's the GTO best optimized balanced play, but like when you're sitting there in the main event and you have 100 big blinds, you're the chip leader with a few people left on day 7, it's easy to be like, well, this is the best play, but this one time I'm not going to make it. I'm just going to fold and wait for a better spot. No, if you want to win the main event, you got to go for plays like these. You got to decide, like, I'm going to play this event to win it. I'm going to be the guy that's tough to play against. I'm going to find ways to, like, outplay my opponents and win chips where others aren't. So power to Sue for going for this epic raise here and jamming all in. Over to Greenwood now, who has an impossibly sick, tough decision. You're in the main event. You're deep. It's all on the line. This is one of those spots where, does he have it or does he not? And sometimes you gotta look at the guy and just decide. But Sue is really not giving anything off. And in this spot, when you don't have any reads, what do? You still have to make a decision. Well, there's two ways to sort of think about this. There's two things you kind of want to consider here. One is you want to think about where you're at in your range. In other words, how strong is this hand relative to all the other hands you can have? Well, aces is pretty damn strong, right? You can have some bluffs, which are going to fold. You can have some queens, which are going to fold, like king, queen, ace, queen, maybe. And then pocket kings, aces, and a jack, right? So this is pretty much the best hand you can have. Sure, you can have a jack some of the time. You're not going to be 3-betting as many jacks pre-flop, and then maybe you're not going to bet the flop with all your jacks. So you're not having as many jacks. So when you look at your range, right? You look at your range on a spectrum here, and you say, where does aces fall? It's pretty much at the top. Now, these specific aces, like we talked about before, actually block your opponent having ace-jack, which makes your aces particularly even better, which means you're likely to have more equity. So this hand is very, very strong, and you're probably going to have to call with this hand because of that, just because you're so high up in your range. The other thing you want to do in a spot like this is you want to give your opponent a range, right? You want to put them on a series of hands that they can have. You want to say, well, he can have some jacks, and he can have some bluffs, and then you want to calculate your equity versus that range and then weigh that against your pot odds and determine if you have the right price. So here's a screenshot here, and I just did this randomly. We don't know exactly what Sue's range is. Like, is he always going to shove with 10-9? Is he only going to shove with 10-9 and King-10 as bluffs? Will he shove with a flush draw? We don't really know. Of course, the more bluffs that are in your opponent's range, the higher your equity is, and the more you're going to have to call. In this situation, I basically gave him a range of King-Jack, Jack-10, and bluffs, which are King-10 and 10-9. I just assumed he would never shove with Queen-Jack, Ace-Jack he can't have, like we discussed, and I said he would never shove with any other bluffs. So facing this range, Greenwood has 53% equity. Now, if you look at the pot odds he's getting, the pot's 16 million, he has to call about 8. He's getting 2-1, he needs 33% equity. This is a clear call here, right? Even with ICM, he's still getting a much better than break-even price on his call, so he's probably going to have to call this one off. He's not loving it, of course. He ends up tanking for a long time. He's not loving this spot, but I think this is ultimately going to be a call. But this is how you want to kind of solve these situations. And if you want more analysis on this, I do feature a lot of this style of content, walk you through my thought process in this linear way in the membership at Conscious Poker. So check that out at the link below if you want more. Now, over to Greenwood, who finally hems and haws and makes the call. And how happy are you, right? You're finally hem and haw, you make the call. You're either drawing dead or pretty much against a jack, or you're way ahead, and you get shown the good news. 10-9. Check this out.
Sam Greenwood way ahead, 4-1. With Sue with 8 outs. To knock out Sam Greenwood.
Is absolutely massive. This got swollen to 31 million chips, which would make Greenwood the chip leader if he can just hold, which he's going to do 82% of the time.
Timothy Sue has to catch a clean river card. And Sam Greenwood is your main event chip leader here late on basics. Greenwood sits down.
I'll take it.
Sue watches this river card come down. Oh! The king comes home for Timothy Sue, sending Sam Greenwood to the rail. Oh my goodness, what a bold play.
Oh my God, I cannot believe that.
What a brutal ending to Sam Greenwood's main event. And now we have a massive chip leader with 46 players remaining in Timothy Sue.
Oh, brutal beat for Greenwood. That hand is so sick to get so far in the main event. Play the hand perfectly, make the hero call, be right, and then lose. That is heart-wrenching. Brutal hand. I hope you like this video. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications. More awesome content from the WSOP main event is coming your way right here. Conscious Poker. Thanks for watching.